When I want to know about esports, I go to his channel. This is Steel and you're watching Thorin.
The Germans are coming, and so will you be when you see this new big lineup. Now, former 0-0 Nation players JDC and syrsoN have been announced as the new players in Big Clan, replacing syn and Mantuu respectively. Now, whenever I do one of these videos where I'm talking about trades or players being added, I obviously do the angle of should you have removed the players before, and should those players even join, and should you add them? Like both, basically all three sides of it. Should they have left their original team? Should you kick the guy you have now? And should you recruit the guy who's left his original team? So first of all, the JDC and syrsoN one I can very quickly answer. 0-0 Nation, the joke is most of you probably weren't even aware they had German players. You probably still thought it was a Brazilian team, even though, by the way, those Brazilian players have been gone for a long time now and have been playing elsewhere, like Cold Zero, as he pointed out in my interview. So it's obvious they should have left that team. It was irrelevant. They were wasting their time there, especially syrsoN. Then if you go to the side of the big players, so in terms of syn, I understood why they brought him in, that whole angle that they wanted to try getting him to be the IGL, and then the notion was that would free up Tabson to maybe frag a bit more. Then you had like Mantuu's AWPing and Tabson's fragging, and you have Crimble then. It's like, hey, we've sort of got enough skill here, and if the IGL part works, maybe we don't lose too much tactically. The problem was, it did look like that didn't work. They had problems, and very quickly they sort of cancelled / decided we're not doing the IGL angle for syn. And so he then just became just a player in the team who's kind of whatever. So at that point, I do think he was surplus to requirements. In terms of Mantuu, I actually thought Mantuu was having a fairly canny run in this team. Like, he did look like he was a level above he was in OG. Obviously, a lot of that was online. He actually looked like he sort of started to get more of a sense of how to read the game. His problem, if you don't know, was because he's not traditionally an AWPer before he joined OG, he always looked like he could shoot with the gun, and he would actually perform at like a level up. Wasn't that bad, but when you got him at the proper tier 1 level, and especially if you threw him on LAN, he just wasn't the guy who could like close out rounds with the AWP, make the shrewd map movements. He sometimes looked a little bit hesitant. Now he looks way better, but his problem is syrsoN is better in all regards, I actually think, as an AWPer. So syrsoN is just a better AWPer on LAN, a more experienced AWPer on LAN. And so as a result, I'm sorry, if you can only have the one AWPer, yeah, I would take syrsoN over Mantuu, especially because the Mantuu angle meant they had to speak English. Now you bring syrsoN back in, you can go back to German. And obviously with such a tactical team, based around team play, knowing their teammates and putting mad hours in the server and demo reviews and theory sessions, having God B's mind and tabs, of course you would want the edge that speaking German has. So actually, at that point in time, there's two reasons to change Mantuu for syrsoN. And I think they both make sense. By the way, I'd also take many other AWPers, assuming they were actually able to speak German. Then if we talk about syrsoN himself, because he's obviously the big name joining the team, this piece alone would make me excited, because I wasn't actually feeling the Mantuu angle in terms of the idea that we're going to like make a playoff run at a big tier 1 LAN, right? Crucially, this guy's already been in Big Clan. So as a result, he's a known quantity to them. He's played with a whole bunch of them. The guy who's his IGL was his IGL before. The guy who's his coach has been his coach. And so as a result, I've already seen him play well on LAN and online in this team when it was a different line, but with those people. And so I get the sense they're going to know how to use him, and he's going to slot right in. Then let's consider he is insane online, and quite frankly, especially at like RMRs and group stages of majors, has been amazing at farming up group stages and tournament area games. So we can maybe get into a thing of like, but is he as good on stage in a big match? The joke is big aren't getting to those stage matches and almost never have. So quite frankly, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And quite frankly, a lot of that was based, I think, on inexperience. He still hasn't actually had that many big playoff runs in the big stadiums, if you don't know. So as a result, I think already you're going to get like a baseline from this guy that's going to actually make a better squad. And the issue for me always was just that he was a very streaky player who had a little bit of inexperience that showed when he was on LAN. Now that there's going to be less of the inexperience issue because he's had the years on LAN, the streaky angle, this is the problem. Normally, I don't like that style of like move a lot, like fast flicky style, constant repeats. Everyone knows it's never been my biggest fan style of AWPing. But that's because of what it does to the role of AWPer and how then it changes what your team can do. Obviously, people will know if you have a JW, I love watching him AWP because on his team, he had the riflers like Crims and Flusher who provided stability in the rest of the squad. Then he had a superstar rifler and Olaf Meister who could do what he did. And then he had an IGL who made all the key rin-round calls and could make up for having a player loss if he went and did some crazy move or missed. So as a result, then the streakiness became an upside there because of what it could give you in certain games. It didn't matter that the baseline was lower because you weren't trying to make him Guardian or Kenny S in your team. The key thing is, Big were kind of playing their game around syrsoN before and acting like he could just be a super stable AWPer, but he isn't some sort of a Ziwu, Jim. He's none of those sorts of players. And so as a result, I actually think what's key here is you don't get the consistency that normally teams, especially tactical teams, say they want from a sniper with syrsoN. But if you look at the other players and how the roles balance out, you don't need it. Actually, this team will offset that aspect. And so, quite frankly, especially since historically Big has been such a structured team with tactical elements. I mean, in the past, it was proteges of God B when he was off in Valorant, like tabseN, like Legia. Now it's literally God B with tabseN again, who wants this. Now, I've pointed out previously, actually, syrsoN himself sometimes would have issues with God B because of how tactically he wants to be, and you have to know this set smoke or flash or where the enemy's going to be or what the move is. He doesn't necessarily like that randomness, but I do think the creative tension of having someone who can make those plays with an overall system that's structured, and now he doesn't have to be a hard carry. I actually think that could be a really dangerous and dynamic weapon for this team and make them less predictable and less of like a ABC type tactical Counter-Strike team. They'll add in a little bit of the flair that you maybe didn't have in the last teams, and he definitely was wasting his talent on shoutout Nation. He was never going to beat anyone on that squad. Then if you come to JDC, this guy isn't just a player. That's one of the most exciting things about him joining this team, in my opinion. If you listen to what the interviews say about when he was in Mouse NXT and Mouse, it actually sounds like he's basically the person who helped scout and put together the Mouse NXT team, the Academy squad, that the joke is nearly all of them have now become tier 1 pros who like are winning tournaments and go deep in big events. But also, then he's the one who came up as one of the first players to the main Mouse squad and then brought them through one by one. They all get integrated, and then the problem for him was it was like some Moses shit. Like at the end, it was like, oh, I can't come into the promised land with you boys. I have to just piss off so that you guys can get someone. Yes, I'm sorry, who's better? The Yim Fat guy is better, right? We've all seen it in the game. But that's also because at that point, Mouse was actually at a level they could win tournaments where, yeah, they actually do need to go for the bigger names if they can. Big isn't actually at the Mouse spots, so they're a level below, so I think it's entirely appropriate to bring this sort of player in. He also has just shown a willingness, I think that's why he was able to put those squads together before, to be a fill player. He'll just do whatever you need. So what's brilliant, as you'll later find out when I actually put the bigger picture of this team out, is he's not going to be like made to do some trash angle. That's what he does in the game anyway. He's a supportive element. He showed promise in Mouse and really did seem like he filled out the rest of the squad so that the Torgies and the Frozens and the exertions of the world could pop off and look really sick and do all the stuff they wanted to do and get their best game out there. So I think he already showed promise. There's way less pressure in this team. And if you look at who else is in the other roles, I think it's such a well-balanced, well-designed and GM team that actually I think he's going to flourish in this team. And I think he'll actually make him a name for himself as sort of a supportive element, like a win you a clutch here and there, provides a kill, backs people up, uses util, whatever you need, basically. So the key thing about this squad that's so exciting to me is actually the team construction. It's not the individual players on their own. It's the totality of what you've got. People will know I've done videos in the past of the roles in the game and how I envision modeling the game. I always say there's an open model where, like, for example, that the reason I had the concept of the first star and the second star is typically you need 2-star players in terms of production to consistently have a chance to win big games. Then what usually determines will you actually be a champion with an era and win major is how good is your 3rd star, because as I've always pointed out, that's where you can kind of choose. That 3rd star, in the same way as in football, you don't have to have like a very attacking lineup. If you don't have loads of superstar attacking midfielders and wingers, you could go with more of a defensive midfield in defense and then just have a couple of amazing players up front and play using defense. Similarly, you could have your 3rd star be a supportive element who's more of the base and working with the in-game leader and the support player or the entries, and he's sort of setting up 2 superstars to be more tactical in the squad and structured, which I imagine is potentially something that can happen here. Or you can have that 3rd star just be a straight up fragger. He can be someone who just also contests with the 2nd and the 1st star to win MVPs or to put up big numbers, and he's basically there to be a star himself, in which case the others are going to have to do more for the base, but you're going to get a lot more production and firepower, and you're going to have a lot more punch in the game. You decide basically whether you're the GM or the IGL, whoever puts the squad together, which team you want. Well, what's key here is it's because you've managed to retain tabseN, who was always an overqualified player for Big Clan specifically. Because now that you've retained him and you've added those 2 players, you have got in tabseN an in-game leader who's above average, potentially good at that role. You have got an above average / good at the role fragger and playmaker who simultaneously is the IGL and can do both. And by the way, is way more valuable than his stats. As I pointed out on, I can't remember if it was, I think it was Snake and Banter. I actually think that this is a player a bit like Magisk or Perfecto or Inters, where they're way better than the stats tell you. Like, it just, I don't care what that rating says. Like, what they can actually do in a game, it's not about what they did overall, but like, they do key things in key moments in the game. They have experience that allows them to make moves and decisions in the game that won't show up on a box score. And they have the respect of their teammates, their veterans. There's so many intangibles and extra things that these guys bring that doesn't show up on a box score on HLTV.org. And so I actually think with this particular player, what's cool is he can actually almost do both of the things I said a third star can do. He can be a guy where you've got Crimbo, you've got syrsoN, they'll be your main stars. One's a rifler, one's an AWPer. And then this guy's a rifler who's IGLing, so he's also potentially going to come from the foundation side IGL-wise, but then he can do damage. Means sometimes he can be your third star in terms of production. I think this is fantastic. I think it's one of the rare times I've ever seen a team nail it, where you've actually got like the OP players in the right roles to give you like two sides of it, as opposed to just one upside and then one downside. No, you get an upside on both regards. And so I will refer back to this again later, because I actually think the coolest thing as well is that now tabseN even gets to justify the whole German angle of staying in big, because the stupidest thing about having Xantares or Smooye or more recently Mantuu is it's like, right, well, the reason I'm not in FaZe or G2 is because I want German CS to be great. Like, all right, what language do you speak in your team? English. Like, that now it's just silly at that point in time, isn't it? It's like, what have we done what was all these years for? Just a waste of time. Now we've just gone to some standard international lineup, but with loads of German players. In other words, a worse team than if you just went purely international. But then, this is the key thing. That's tabseN. Now let's put Crimbo in there. Right, we've been talking on shows recently. Crimbo actually was probably wasted on this team the last year or so. Like, he actually looks, as the months go by on LAN, like he's a legit star rifle talent. He's the best German player, and quite frankly, probably should have gone elsewhere and been in another team and been like a pretty good player in a better squad. The joke is he could even be in a mouse or something to replace Frozen, right? So it looked like he's also wasted his time a la tabseN. But here's the good news. I don't know whether he cares about the German angle, but they're going to be speaking German, and he's going to actually have a chance to be a real star in this team, and he's got pieces around him that now I think are as good as almost any of those teams, unless he was going to get into a G2 or a Vitality, which I don't think he was going that high. I think it would have been a mouse or an Enter, that sort of a squad, or OG, etc. Then lastly, there's one player less you probably even forgot about if you haven't watched Big on LAN, which is obviously Process, right? Now, what's brilliant here is, notice how we're not switching anyone's roles. This guy's an entry player, but now has very little pressure because we've got stars and bigger names, and he's the smallest name in this team. And there's no one obvious to replace him anyway, except people they've already had. They've already had Keto, they've already had Favre, as like Maui suggested. So actually, I think this guy will be like one less ego. He'll just fit into the team. He's going to have a lot of chance to develop and get some experience under his belt, and he's just going to do his job. And I tell you what, it's a lot easier to be an entry when you got players like Crimbo and syrsoN and tabseN following you up than it is when you just got people like syrsoN, Mantuu, and players like this that are in the mix, right? I actually think also it makes his job easier. Then look at the totality of what this means if you add all the players, roles, tendencies, and what they want to do together. This is insane. Almost every team has some form of compromise. Look, they obviously will have compromise of who plays what CT spot or who goes in what order sometimes on T side on a map based on the mid-round call or the initial from spawn tactic. Yeah, there's going to be some of that. But if you look at the bigger roles in this team, think about what this team has. I have a star AWPer in terms of talent and potential who could put up star AWPer numbers, but he doesn't have the pressure to have the hard carry. He doesn't have to do what like the monster AWPers do on LAN. Then I've got a star rifler. So I was talking about syrsoN before, now I'm talking about Crimbo. But he doesn't have the hard carry either. He doesn't have to do some donk, Nico, Axa. He doesn't have to do any of that. He can just be a good player who does his role, does like decent production, and the rest of the team, we've got good players in all the roles, that can be good enough. When you actually have a really well-balanced team, you can have 5 like good or like average to above average players, and that can be a very good team. As teams, I think, like Heroic showed you of those, the old Ents with LXEB and Aerial and X7 and all those guys. Then you've got a strong in-game leader that gives you bonus fragging, is really experienced, and quite frankly, hasn't dropped off that much. I mean, and also has no resentment the fact he's staying in this team. He loves it. He chooses to be in this project to make German CS great again. You've got a support player in JDC who now can just focus on facilitating. Doesn't have that much pressure, but has a bunch of pieces that are probably like slightly OP for the money they're being paid and the project that they're in, and suddenly has a chance to potentially do better than maybe even Mouse did. Yes, that's a big ask considering after him they went on to win Pro League the last CS2 LAN, right? And then lastly, you've got Process. You've got an entry who has more experienced players around him, is going to be talking in his native language instead of English, has Gob B to help put him in position, develop him, tell him what he's doing wrong, how to fit in. He's got a team where if he does a good job with util, it's going to be fantastic. And then he has stars to produce numbers and that he's going to make space for, get kills for, come to in their native language, and then they're going to do the rest. I actually think this is one of, no joke, one of the best put together teams based on the initial premise of the project and the parameters that you have and the budget I think I've ever seen in Counter-Strike. Like for real, ever in Counter-Strike. Assuming we're not talking about just the greatest team of all time with all the money put like a superstar. This is such a shrewdly I wouldn't even say cynically, I would say like intelligently put together roster. Like it's a style of team that has good firepower, but spread out, not all in one player. It's got all the roles covered and by players who want to do those roles, have done those roles. And I won't say as much in terms of process, but the rest of them, and are good at those roles. It's got experience and youth combined and in the right position. So you've got like 1 star's inexperienced in Crimbo, but he's getting there. Then you've got 1 star that's experienced now in syrsoN. Then you've got 2 supportive elements in process and JDC, where they've got varying degrees of experience. JDC's got some, he's even beaten majors. Obviously, you have way less in terms of process. And then you've got 1 mega experienced in-game leader and 3rd star. And by the way, he's done both those roles now for quite a while. And then you've got a mega experience in terms of Counter-Strike coach, who's also done a bit of coaching, God be, and former in-game leader, who was insanely experienced and basically designed the style of Counter-Strike that you play now and has actually influenced your IGL. Like, what more could you want? Oh yeah, that's right. They also are going to be speaking the same language with the same culture. And in their team, they have a very tight team bond where they meet up in person and go for dinners, and they're actually part of like the culture of even the owner of the orgs. It's not even just like culture, like, oh cool, this actually could be a team. I actually think, here's what I'll say, I think this could be like a German heroic. I think it could have like consistency, really strong map pool, good T-sides, CT rotations are tight, they win off team play, they have the advantage of having comms in their native language. I could actually see this being a team on that sort of a level, quite frankly. I think the potential is really exciting. Like, this is going to be, I think, the best big lineup ever. And it's actually going to do something special. The other ones, like when they made the final of that Cologne in 2018, that was a fluke. This could actually be a really good team. Like, I actually think immediately this looks like top 10 material in terms of the rankings. Like, the pieces are there. It can be a playoff team at the big lands. I see it as like potentially like a sort of dark horse team. I actually think with the tactical component, they could be one where it's certain teams are going to be scared to draw this team in the bracket. Like, the massive X factor obviously is the team play. Can they get that aspect together? It's not production in terms of firepower. It's not tactics. Those things I think can all be there. Already in theory are there in the personality. You just got to fit them together. It's how well will they work as a unit? Because if they have really good team play, the nationality angle for once in Big's history becomes a big strength and not actually a minor downside, which is that it stops you getting talent in and having enough good players and then having to pick between dodgy players. No, at this point in time, this can be a boon in a world where so many other teams are actually speaking in English and aren't getting that extra half a second from speaking their native language to someone who understands what they mean, who've been in the squad for the same amount of time. This is so exciting. I actually, for real, I'm kind of hyped about this big team, and I want to see them go out there and become a team that might be like 7th, 8th in the world. They could go higher, obviously, if they have deep runs, but you put them into a bracket, you don't necessarily want to draw this team in the quarterfinals if you're a team that doesn't play well against tactical squads, or your map pool isn't that deep, or you have like a good AWPer, but then you don't have the star rifler, or you have like some stars, but then you don't have the tactical base, or you have a tactical base, but you don't have that much production. There's so many types of teams I could see them matching up well with. I think this is a really cool lineup. Events come and go, fame rises and then falls away. You have a job, you lose a job. You do one thing, you have to move on to another. But one of the cool things about my career is I have my own support network who's always got my back. So I always know I can rely on the support to do the work I want to do and talk the way I want to talk and not have to follow certain rules that others arbitrarily have to follow. And that support group is, of course, called the Skrilluminati, my Patreon community. This video and all the others on my channel was kindly supported by Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Frisky, Ahmed Hadjou, Tobias Bernasconi, Thooorin, Tosh, Jensen Goh, Animosity, and you know it, always my main man Jerky's minion, rocking with me, ride or die. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for a future episode of Reflections or a talk show? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are? Maybe you want to ask me a question for my video AMA where I tend to go quite in depth, or perhaps you want to take part in one of those really long donated discussions where we talk about whatever you're into in esports. Well, if any of those perks or any of the others catch your fancy, join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box where? Down below.